hum with faint electric whispers. Soft panels of light glowed along the walls, painting futuristic patterns across sleek surfaces. In the center, Ionian girl froze, her glowing eyes wide, shimmering like molten stars, her delicate hands lifted slightly and trembling as though suspended in time. And then the door opened. A human man stood bathed in a gentle, almost ethereal light that softens his heroic features. There was a quiet strength in his presence, a kindness that radiated from him without a word. The air seemed to hold its breath, and she was utterly breathless. Every pulse in her body felt magnified, every thought suspended. Her wide eyes locked on him, heart racing, as though the world itself had paused. In that fleeting moment, the alien girl understood something extraordinary had just entered her life, something that would change everything. The room was a quiet symphony of light and shadow, a space that seemed to exist somewhere between reality and a dream. Soft, luminescent panels lined the walls, casting an ambient glow that shifted subtly with every passing moment, painting the surfaces in gradients of pale blues, muted purples, and faint silver tones. The glow was never harsh, never overwhelming. It was a kind of illumination that seemed to cradle the senses, gently guiding the eye from one detail to the next. The panels between the walls were smooth but not sterile, subtly textured in ways that suggested advanced materials, something far beyond ordinary composites, something engineered to feel almost alive. Shadows pooled naturally in the corners and along the edges of the room, darkening and softening as the light shifted, giving depth and dimension to a space that might otherwise have seemed flat and clinical. Embedded in the walls, almost hidden unnoticed, were small technological details, subtle readouts, blinking faintly, holographic indicators that shimmered and vanished before fully materializing, vents that hummed quietly with controlled airflow, and slender conduits that hinted at a complex network of energy and information flowing beneath the surface. There was no clutter, no superfluous decoration, yet the room did not feel empty. It was full of purposeful design, every curve and plane chosen with precision, each line suggesting both elegance and efficiency. The ceiling was high and not so expansive as to make one feel dwarf, and it bore similar glowing elements that created a soft, almost a celestial canopy overhead, casting diffused reflection that danced lightly across the polished floor. The floor itself was smooth, cool underfoot, with panels that seemed to subtly absorb the light and then release it in quiet pulses, so that as one moved across the room, faint ripples of illumination traveled in tandem with each step, like tiny echoes of movement caught in the fabric of the space. In one corner, a console extended from the wall, its surface sleek, dark, and almost liquid in appearance, responding instantly to the touch with faint ripples of interactive light. Its interface was minimal yet sophisticated, being a language of symbols and patterns that suggested a deep understanding of human and alien interaction alike. Above it, a small array of floating holograms shimmered gently, projecting graph schematics and softly pulsing data streams, all hovering just beyond reach, but clearly visible. In the room, a quiet, alive intelligence. Across the room, a series of cylindrical structures rose from the floor, faintly glowing at their core, surfaces covered in subtle markings that hinted at alien design, technology beyond contemporary comprehension, yet integrated seamlessly into the environment, suggesting a place where the unhuman, the known, and the unknown coexisted with natural harmony. The air itself seemed different, imbued with a delicate hum of energy that could be felt more than heard, brushing against the skin with a whisper of movement and metallic scent tempered by a cleaner, neutral undertone, something that suggested a space perfectly calibrated for both life and machinery. Despite the futuristic, almost clinical technology surrounding it, but the room exuded an atmosphere of intimacy, an emotional resonance that spoke of stories unfolding, of moments yet to happen. The soft light reflected across the surfaces in gentle gradients, making each edge, each curve, each recess appear sculpted, purposeful, almost artistic. Even the shadows had intention, and fallen in ways that suggested they were guided as the room itself were aware of the presence of anyone entering it, responded to movement, anticipation, and focus. Along one wall, a transparent partition hid in another chamber beyond, with the glass-like material showing faint silhouettes and shifting, giving a sense of depth and complexity to the space, as though it extended beyond was immediately visible. The combination of all these elements, glowing panels, subtle shadows, refined technological hints, and interactive surfaces created a seamless environment. Those barely envy are advanced yet welcoming, precise yet poetic. Every the faint hum in the air to the gentle pulses of reflected light in the walls and floor contribute to a cohesive sense of sophistication and purpose. It was a room that encouraged observation, that demanded attention to its quiet and nuanced cues, a place where light and shadow, knowledge and design, intention and emotion all intersected flawlessly. Time within the room felt elastic, slowed by the steady, calming presence of its lighting and textures, yet charged with potential, as if every holographic shimmer, every faint glow was waiting to tell a story, to interact, to respond to those who entered with curiosity, care, or awe. The atmosphere simultaneously serene and expectant, A perfect balance of comfort and subtle tension, offering a sense of being part of something far greater, something meticulously constructed yet effortlessly natural in its futuristic elegance. She stood in the center of the softly glowing room, a figure so delicate that for a moment it seemed she might dissolve into the light itself. Her form was slender and graceful, every movement careful yet unstudied, as if she were attuned to the rhythm of the space around her. Her skin shimmered faintly under the ambient glow, almost translucent, hinting at the fine network of veins beneath, the subtle warmth of life pulsing quietly. Her eyes were the most striking feature, glowing softly with a luminescence that seemed to carry their own inner light that shifted between pale sapphire and somber depending on how the light caught them. They were wide, expressive, holding impossibly deep in them emotion that words could never fully capture. In those eyes, wonder, fear, hope, and all coexisted, layered one upon another like fragile glass panes, each reflecting the world in a slightly different hue. As she inhaled, her chest rose delicately, shoulders slightly tense, hinting at a breath caught somewhere between shock and anticipation. Her lips were parted not in speech, but in quiet astonishment. When a gentle gasp that seemed to suspend the moment around her, even the slightest movement of her fingers carried significance, raised slightly as if she were preparing to reach for something just out of reach, or to shield herself from a sudden revelation. Her hair, fine and almost weightless, and framed her face into the softened contrastity of her gaze, falling in subtle waves that shimmered faintly under the ambient light, catching every glint and reflection in a way that seemed almost deliberate, as if the strands themselves were aware of her emotions. Her posture was hesitant yet elegant, a mixture of vulnerability and quiet strength, the way a creature unaccustomed to the presence of others stand when confronted with something both terrifying and irresistible. Every detail of her expression spoke of emotion in its purest form, the rapid flutter of her eyelids, the slight quiver in her jaw, the subtle tension in her neck, the way her hand shifted as if to anchor herself to the moment without truly touching anything. The glow in her eyes seemed to intensify when she focused on the figure entering the room, the light reflecting back in miniature patterns across the delicate planes of her face, creating a visual echo of her inner turmoil. There was an almost musical quality to the way her emotions played across her features. A silent crescendo building within that made the air around her feel charged in anticipation. Her skin, flawless and smooth, carried a natural iridescence, faintly catching the soft light in a manner that highlighted the gentle cons of her cheekbones, the delicate slope of her nose, and the graceful line of her neck. Her breathing was shallow, but a visible pulse of life that added to the intensity of her expression, each inhale drawing her closer to the edge of wonder and awe. The delicate bones of her hands and wrists moved with subtle intention, fingers curling slightly, knuckle kin the soft light, as if each tiny gesture carried the weight of her emotions. Her gaze, unwavering and entirely focused, revealed a story without words and narrative isolation, of longing, of sudden, unexpected connection, of awe at the presence of something entirely extraordinary. She radiated a quiet luminescence herself, a presence that seemed to interact with the ambient light in the room, enhancing the soft shadows and glowing panels around her, and making her feel like both a part of the environment and entirely separate from it. Her emotions were palpable in the stillness of her form, resonating with the space around her, creating a sense of suspense and intimacy that drew attention without effort. And even the slight tilt of her head suggested questions she could not yet ask, feelings she'd not yet name, a breathless curiosity that seemed to pull the air in and hold it suspended just as she did in that moment. There was a fragility to her, yes, but not weakness. It was the kind of delicate presence that commanded attention through honesty, feeling rather than force, a raw, unfiltered clarity that made her glow in every sense, both figuratively and literally. Her eyes, always luminous, held reflections of the room's light, the figure entering, and perhaps something even deeper, something that hinted at intelligence and perception beyond mere survival. Each flicker of emotion across her features, each subtle shift in posture, each quiver of breath, painted a picture of a being entirely alive in that precise instant. Consumed by the intensity of what she was seeing and feeling, she was beautiful not in the sense of perfection, but in the sense of total authenticity, a living expression of wonder, awe, and fragile courage, her glowing eyes the windows to the depth of her soul, and a soul caught in a breathless moment that seemed to stretch time itself. But the air in the room was thick with anticipation, vibrating with a tension that seemed almost tangible, like the charge before a storm. Every soft glow from the panels along the walls cast long shifting shadows, weaving patterns across the floor that flickered as though they were alive and moving in rhythm with the rapid pulse of her heart. She stood frozen, the alien and ethereal, her glowing eyes with intensity that made the space around her feel both intimate and impossibly vast. Her breath came in shallow, hesitant pulse, each inhale carrying the weight of wonder, fear, and all at once, leaving her suspended in a moment. Light caught her, fused to the light to light her face, and for highlighting the subtle curves of her cheekbones, the gentle slope of her neck, the fine tremor of her lips, as if she were on the edge of speech, though no sound emerged. In every tiny movement she made, the slight raise of her hand seemed amplified in the charged atmosphere, as if even the air were holding its breath alongside her. And then he appeared, a human figure stepping into the softly lit space, presence commanding yet gentle. His gaze meeting hers with a warmth cut through the tension like sunlight breaking through clouds. The room seemed to lean toward him, the shadows retreating just enough to frame his features, the soft glow of the panels reflecting faintly in his eyes, making them appear luminous with quiet intent. He moved not with hesitation, but with careful deliberation, as though every step were chosen to honor the fragile intensity of the moment, bridging the chasm between two beings from worlds apart. The alien girl's eyes, wide and unblinking, tracked him with a mixture of disbelief and fascination. But every fiber of her being alive to his presence, every emotion amplified the subtler light and shadow around them. The tension between them was palpable, a current flowing, invisible yet insistently pulling them close, even as unspoken questions hovered like specters in the air. She felt an unfamiliar stirring within her chest, a rapid flutter that was near in her simple curiosity, something deeper, sunder, almost unbearably human in its intensity, yet entirely new to her. Her gaze softened ever so slightly, as if acknowledging the quiet kindness in his expression and the courage and care that radiated without a word. And the room seemed to contract and expand simultaneously, every shadow and glow magnified, every detail of their surrounded sharp yet dreamlike, framing them as the only two entities that existed in that suspended reality. And then quickened, her breathing, her hands rising slightly to steady herself, as if she felt no need for grounding. Instead, it was a delicate surrender, a silent acknowledgement of the connection threading invisibly between them. The light in her eyes seemed to pulse spawning to him, reflecting fragments of his image in a kaleidoscope of emotion, fear, awe, wonder, and a nascent tenderness that shimmered like the edges of a star. Every flicker of her expression carried weight, each subtle movement telling a story she could not yet articulate, yet that he seemed to understand instinctively. When the soft hum of technology in the walls, the gentle ripple of light across the floor, the faint echoes of their breaths, all merged in a symphony of suspense and intimacy, each sound and shimmer of the drama unfolding in the space between them. There was a magnetism in his presence, not forceful but undeniable, drawing her focus with the inevitability of gravity, making the space around them charged with anticipation, unspoken promise. A heartbeat later, she felt it, the thrill of recognition, the stirrings of something both fragile and profound, a sensation that brushed to the edges of fear, hope, and desire all at once. In the quiet of that softly lit room, time seemed to bend, stretching moments into eternity, making the pause between heartbeats feel like a tangible thing, rich with possibility. And yet beneath the suspense, beneath the intensity of the fear and awe, there was something more delicate, almost imperceptible at first, thread of romance woven into the electric tension, subtle but undeniable, a promise in the gaze, a whisper in the tone of a smile, a warmth that lingered despite the alien glow surrounding her. She could feel it in the way her breath caught when he stepped closer, in the slight quickening of her pulse, in the luminous flutter of her eyes that seemed to speak a language older than words. And though neither spoke, though silence stretched like a living thing between them, the room itself seemed to lean in, acknowledging the significance of the encounter, the fragile balance of suspense, drama, emotion, and the first glimmer of something tender and intimate that could blossom. They allowed it in that suspended moment, every shadow, every pulse of light, every subtle vibration in the air attributed to a tableau of heightened emotion, a scene alive with drama and suspense, yet threaded with the soft and spoken language of attraction, connection, and the fragile hope of closeness. She remained breathless, caught between awe and desire. As he approached, the room itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the inevitable convergence of two beings from different worlds, suspended in a moment charged with suspense, emotion, and the faint but undeniable pulse of romance. When her face filled the frame of her own consciousness, every detail magnified by intensity of the moment, the soft glow of the room played across her delicate features, highlighting the subtle contours of her cheekbones, the gentle slope of her nose, and the curve of her jowl. Each line rendered a fragile elegance that seemed almost otherworldly. Her eyes, luminous and impossibly deep, were the first thing to draw attention, wide and unblinking, shimmering with an inner light that flickered like the surface of a quiet lake catching distant stars. But they were enormous in their expressiveness, reflecting not only the soft ambient glow of the room, but also the shock, awe, and wonder that surged through her in waves, leaving her almost breathless. Each blink seemed to take longer than the last, her lash casting delicate shadows across her cheeks, brushing softly against the iridescent glow of her skin, adding texture and depth to the luminous intensity of her gaze. Her pupils glowing faintly ambient light, dilated with the suddenness of the emotion. She felt a mixture of disbelief, curiosity, and an unfamiliar warmth that spread from her chest to her fingered hips. Her mildly a delicate curve that carried the weight of unspoken words, the faintest tremor betraying the rapid, uneven rev of her heartbeat. It was a silent gasp that seemed suspended between wonder and anticipation, as if her voice had been caught mid-flight, leaving only the fragile movement of her lips and the tension in her jaw to convey the enormity of what she was seeing. Her hands lifted instinctively, delicate fingers curling slightly as if reaching towards something she could barely comprehend, yet needing to respond nonetheless. Each finger trembled faintly, catching the glow of the ambient light, highlighting the smooth, almost ethereal texture of her skin, the subtle, almost imperceptible lines etched into her knuckles, the elegance of a form that had never been observed with such intent focus. Her shoulders tensed just enough to betray the sudden surge of emotion, and the subtle rise of her collarbone beneath her skin seemed to mirror the kind of her pulse. Every tiny movement, every slight quiver spoke volumes about the storm of feeling inside her, fear and joie, shock, tangled with fascination and a soft, almost imperceptible thread of curiosity that hinted at something more tender, more human than she had ever acknowledged before. The soft ambient glow of the room seemed to respond to her presence, refracting across her skin in a way that made each strand shimmer faintly, framing her face like a halo that emphasized the intensity of her expression. Her gaze was locked on him, the human in whose presence seemed to pull the very air toward him, drawing her attention like a magnet, making everything else fade into the periphery. Even the subtle trembling of her eyelids, the quiver of her lips, and the tiny raising of her hands were amplified by the closeness of the view, magnifying the impact of her reaction, turning her quiet astonishment to an almost tangible force in the space around her. Her glowing eyes reflected hints of his figure, fragments of his face captured in the light, mirrored in the depths of her pupils in miniature, creating a surreal, almost intimate connection that transcended the distance between them. Her breathing became visible, slight and rapid, a series of shallow inhales and exhales that seemed to synchronize with the faint flickering of her glowing eyes, each pulse of breath emphasizing the fragile tension between shock and wonder, anticipation and fear. Even the slight tilt of her head suggests the complexity of her reaction, a questioning motion, a subconscious attempt to reconcile what she saw, what she had known before, the motion graceful yet precise, like a leaf bending under a gentle current yet refusing to break. Every detail of her expression carried layers of narrative, the wideness of her eyes, the parting of her lips, the lift of her hands, the subtle quiver of her shoulders, all composing a visual symphony of emotion that required no words, only observation. This was intimate, this was with a quiet drama, every nuance of light and shadow, and the delicate textures of her skin and hair working together to heighten the tension, creating a moment that seemed suspended outside of time, where the world existed only in the immediacy of her perception. And as she held her gaze, hands slightly raised, mouth softly open, caught between disbelief and wonder, anticipates a hint of something softer, something more fragile yet profoundly compelling, a nascent, unspoken connection, a thread of emotional resonance that hinted at intimacy and trust, fragile but undeniable. Lingering in the silence of the suspended moment, a single heartbeat stretching in eternity, and he stepped into the softly glowing room with a presence that was immediately undeniable, yet carried a quiet, measured gentleness that seemed to fill the space without forcing it. The panels along the walls cast ambient, diffused light across his features, highlighting the subtle strength in his form and the kindness etched into the lines of his face. Every movement was deliberate, confident, yet unhurried, as if he understood the fragility of the moment and chose each step with care, both respectful and aware of the fragile tension that hung in the air. The soft light caught the planes of his jaw, tracing the gentle slope from ear to chin, revealing a quiet strength that was softened by warmth and approachability. His eyes, the color of muted earth beneath the glow, held a steady calm, bright with empathy and curiosity. And as they met the faint shimmer of her gaze across the room, they seemed to reflect a quiet understanding, a recognition that transcended the need for words. The ambient illumination brushed over his cheekbones and forehead, adding such gentle shadows that gave depth, character to his expression, emphasizing both the determination, his approach, and the kindness that radiated without effort. His shoulders were relaxed, his posture straight but not rigid, carrying the natural grace of someone accustomed to moving with both intention and ease, creating an aura of reliability and warmth that seemed to soften the ambient glow around him. Every step he took was measured fluid, the polished floor catching slight reflections of his movements, a delicate interplay of light and shadow that lent the moment cinematic clarity. And as if the room itself were framing him as the focal point of a scene spent between anticipation and revelation, the gentle sway of his arms at his sides, the natural rhythm of his stride suggested a confidence was quiet but absolute at quietude, a presence that invited trust rather than demanded attention. And the soft cinematic lighting made every subtle gesture visible, emphasizing the understated power in his approach. There was a softness in the expression of his mouth, the hint of a smile barely perceptible yet present, a signal of reassurance, kindness, but a warmth that made the tension in the room edge slightly, even as her wide, glowing eyes remained fixed on him in awe. The light traced along the line of his nose, highlighting its strength and symmetry, while the shadows beneath his brow added depth and focus to the intensity of his gaze. which was fixed gently but unwaveringly on the figure across the room. Each movement seemed choreographed by instinct, not pretense, combining the quiet certainty of confidence with the subtle attentiveness of someone aware of another's vulnerability, and creating a dynamic of presence that was both commanding and tender. Even the small details, the gentle tilt of his head, the faint shift of weight from one foot to the other, the slight lift of his chin spoke volumes about approach, a choreography of reassurance, courage, and a calm and steady gravity that was amplified by the soft, cinematic glow surrounding him. His hair caught the light along the edges, revealing faint highlights that seemed to shimmer as he moved, and subtle that emphasized the natural ease of his presence. Relaxed at his sides, carried no tension, only the quiet readiness to act with care if needed. There was an almost magnetic quality. He advanced. The space between him and the alien girl charged with a mix of anticipation, suspense, silent connection, and every pulse of the ambient light seemed to accentuate the contours of his face, the smooth flow of his movements, and the gentle authority that emanated from his posture. Even the faint rise and fall of his chest, visible in the cinematic lighting, suggested controlled energy and steady calm, a rhythm in sync with the quiet intensity of the moment, and conveying not only his physical confidence, but a depth of emotional awareness, a readiness to bridge the divide between two beings from different worlds. The shadows around him soft as he moved, the ambient panels reflected in his eyes, giving them an almost luminous quality, a depth that spoke empathy and understanding, and a quiet heroism without bravado. His approach was neither rushed nor hesitant. It was a balance of essence and care, emotion perfectly in tune with the fragile, breathless anticipation of the room, creating a cinematic tableau in which every feature, every gesture, and every subtle shift of light and shadow contributed to the drama unfolding. As he drew near, the subtle illumination traced the warmth of his expression, the steady kindness in his eyes, the gentle firmness of his jaw, and the quiet grace of his stride, emphasizing a presence that was both heroic and tendering. A figure who seemed to exist in perfect harmony with the light and the space around, every movement telling a story of careful, intense, silent reassurance, and an unspoken connection that pulsed in the charged air of the room. He was a study in contrast, confident, gentle, commanding yet tender, and illuminated perfectly by the ambient glow, a figure whose every step carried weighting and the promise of care. His presence transforming the room into a cinematic moment of suspended emotion, anticipation, and subtle, burgeoning intimacy.